Hello, and I'm afraid I've forgotten you're still alive. Welcome to Best of the Rest. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined as always by my twice immortal co-host, Andrew Williams. Andrew, how are we doing today?
You know, Chris, as the world goes, I go with it.
I can't tell if that's a optimistic, hopeful thing you just said or incredibly depressing, Andrew.
Yes.
Okay, understood. Got it. Well, look, normally, I like to catch up over the week that it's been since we recorded last or whatever, but we've got a lot of ground to cover. I kind of want to just jump into things, Andrew. People listening, you saw the title of this episode. You know what we're talking about. But first, I want to talk about Highlander, the original film, the first film in this sprawling franchise, the cult classic Highlander. Andrew, that's not what we're covering today, but what is your history with that first movie? Is it something you've seen often?
I have watched it. That's my history with Highlander.
Okay.
No, I obviously you hear everybody kind of like the legacy of this franchise is Highlander is great. Everything else is pretty disposable.
But there's so much of it, which is such wild.
There really is. It's kind of nuts, and there's a long gestating reboot that's probably at like Crow levels of like development hell at this point of how long they've been trying to make a new Highlander movie. It does gain a new lease on life with the television show, which spawns 5 seasons and I think 2 more movies.
Wow.
One of which does feature both Christopher Lambert and Adrian Paul. But also, I think this movie confirms that it's Lambert, but we'll talk about that later. But
interesting.
Anyway,
I'm still saying Lambert, but we'll come back. Put a pin in that, Andrew.
Anyway, as far as Highlander goes, the biggest legacy for me is probably the soundtrack. Princes of the Universe is a great song. And you hear more and more about it, and you realize that, like, genuinely Queen was like, yeah, we'll record songs for Highlander, who cares? And I was like, that's why you're the GOAT, man. But it's obviously that's a big piece of it. Just it's kind of campy, it's kind of cheesy, but that kind of all builds into it. The idea of like there can be only one, obviously that's entered the pop culture lexicon. So Highlander has this legacy that kind of really can't be denied. And so I can't say I desperately sought it out and was like, oh man, I gotta watch Highlander. But I watched Highlander and I was like, yeah, that was pretty cool.
I watched Highlander for the very first time yesterday at the time of this recording. And
you've watched Highlander before you've watched Indiana Jones. That's insane to me.
That is true. I still haven't. I think I've seen Raiders. Probably not.
You have cognizantly digested Highlander before you've cognizantly digested Indiana Jones.
For all intents and purposes, I've 100% seen Highlander before Indiana Jones. You are absolutely correct. Andrew, I've seen Highlander before I've watched Citizen Kane, Schindler's List. There's plenty of classics I have not knocked off, but I have seen Highlander. And just like you're saying, it's amazing to me how much there can be only one is so well known in pop culture. It's referenced everywhere. Anytime there's like a sitcom with nerd dude bros, like they love Highlander. I feel like I can picture in my head like Dane Cook quoting Highlander. I can't tell you what movie that is, but everyone knows. Like I know everything I know about this franchise before I watched them. I know through osmosis, through pop culture. I know there can be only one. I know it's about immortals. I know they can only be killed if their head is cut off, which in my book doesn't make you immortal, but that's neither here nor there. But I just know the basis and like imagery of a cliff. I always imagine them fighting on a cliff, which I think I just got that from like the poster maybe. So I watched Highlander. I watched the first one, and hashtag PP Andrew. I'm a little bit reminded of Friday the 13th, which is a franchise I've loved. We discussed it, but what's unique about that franchise is they're kind of all bad. It starts off is what it is, campy, and there's ups and downs, but like there's not like the one. It's not like Halloween, just to keep in league with horror franchises, where there's the great one, like sequels. I kind of feel that way about Highlander. Like that first movie, which is not like a smash hit, it's not award winning, it's fairly well received, but not a critic darling. It just sort of hits at the right time in the 80s to hit home video and gains a cult following. But yet that cult following leads to this, crossover into pop culture. But that first movie, it's so... I can watch it and I can understand how it gets a cult following. It's very ambitious. Lots of big set pieces, striking imagery at times, very unique way of telling the story through flashbacks. You've got like two different timelines that you're watching, but it's the same characters in both timelines. It's interesting. I can't say it's suddenly, I'm not going to seek out a 4K or whatever, but I'm glad I saw it. But I will say, again, #PP, I'm watching the movie downstairs yesterday. A friend of the show, my wife, she's in the room for a little bit, and she's like, wow, yeah, this is pretty cheesy. I'm like, oh, this is the first one. Like, we're covering the second one. I'm just watching this to kind of get caught up. And she's like, oh, this is the good one.
Oh,
yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So I don't want to, #positive podcast. I'm not trying to come down that first one. I did enjoy it. And like I said, I think I get it. But I was kind of expecting more, given how many, how big the legacy is, how many sequels and spinoffs and stuff there are. But, I get it. I saw it. And I'm glad I watched it before I watched the second one, because so much of why the second one has that reception is because of how it relates to the first one, or refuses to relate to the first one, or retcons the first one. As a follow-up to the first one, the second one becomes kind of baffling. And Andrew, that's what we're here to talk about today, because every week we take a second look at a movie that was poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. It is 0% month, and this week we are talking the 1991 film Highlander II. And Andrew, that's what the title card says, at least on the version that I watched. We'll get to the versions. It just says Highlander II, but on the VHS cover and posters, it usually says Highlander II: The Quickening. I'm not a big fan of the subtitle. That's a weird one. What say you, Andrew? Any strong feelings about this?
I would love to say that I have strong feelings about this, but I just cannot bring myself to have strong feelings about this. It's one of those things that, like, I truly, honestly, like, it's... I was trying to remember if the version that I saw called it The Quickening. But because it goes through... Because, we'll talk about this a little bit more on the show, but fun fact, we actually both watched technically different versions of this movie, but neither was the Renegade version of the movie, so I'm not entirely sure how that happened.
We both watched a version that people saw in 1991, so I think it kind of works out that we're kind of covering all bases.
I think the U.S. theatrical version does say Highlander II: The Quickening, and I say I think because I'm looking at it right now.
Okay, so you're pretty sure then.
I'm pretty sure.
All right.
Call it 90-10 sure that the theatrical version calls it, the U.S. one at least calls it The Quickening, right. Which is, as nicely as I can say, a still confusing title no matter what.
The fact that you're using a made-up word, or just a word from the movie's lore as the subtitle, like who's going to be drawn in? How many more tickets are you selling by calling it Highlander 2: The Quickening versus just Highlander 2? I mean, keep it simple, folks. But that is sorry. #PP.
Is there ever a movie that's done that before? The sequel title is like an in-universe thing.
How about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania? I mean, I guess. Yeah. Well, no one says Quantumania in. That's still.
And it's not like they establish in like a previous movie that Quantumania is a thing. Like it's.
Yeah.
Like it would have been like if it was Ant-Man and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantum Realm or something, I guess would have been better. Yeah. But
I'm sure it's been done, but I don't know.
No way to check.
Feel free to write in and let us know if one is springing to mind. But Andrew, normally is where I ask you what your history is with this movie, but we kind of covered it already. At some point, you dove into the Highlander franchise and you saw Highlander 2 before this week. Is that correct? Or have you only seen the first
I've seen Highlander 2 before. I'd seen Highlander 2 before. Because there was a point where, like, you go down the Highlander rabbit hole a little bit, how there's like 3 different timelines in this like people talk about like Halloween inventing multiple franchises or timelines, or when it did like H2O and then did Halloween 18 again. Highlander was doing that way before anybody else was, because there's Highlander to Highlander 2, which is somehow supposed to be a shared continuity. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Then there is Highlander and Highlander 3, which is a whole new thing. Like, it's a separate, like...
Just ignores
Highlander 3, I think it's called Highlander the Source, maybe. Or no, that's a different one. It is a very, very long... let's see real quick. So it's... Okay, Highlander 3, The Sorcerer. I'm sorry. We went from an in-universe thing to the most generic thing possible. But that one is a standalone sequel to Highlander. It ignores Highlander 2. And then there's Highlander Endgame, which is Highlander 4, but that is a continuation of Highlander the television series, which ignores Highlander 2 and, I believe, Highlander 3. And then there is a fifth Highlander film that is technically a direct sequel to Highlander 4. So, not at all confusing. So at one point I did dive into everything. I don't remember almost anything about Highlander 3, 4, and 5. I don't know if any of them were theatrical. I've probably talked about this before, but part of the reason I did that is because in one of my editing classes, I had to edit some clips from Highlander the series, where I had to cut together. That was like the exercise. They gave you all the raw footage of these scenes, and it was your job to edit them together, and that was your exercise. And if you actually go on YouTube and you search like Highlander the Vampire editing, you'll see people that have uploaded like their versions of those scenes. And it was an interesting thing. Just obviously, here's all the raw footage. What would you do? And then you watch the real episode and you realize that everyone basically did the only thing you really could do with it. It's not exactly like television was renowned for its hours of coverage regarding television action sequences. But that was a weird experience. But that was the television show, which McLeod is in the first episode. And Connor, rather, is in the first episode with this new guy, played by Adrian Paul, as Duncan McLeod. And I think it's actually 6 seasons that it gets. So, yeah, at one point I did a deep dive. I think I actually have Highlander the series on my Vudu, because one day it was on sale for like $10. Like, the whole run was on sale for $10. And I was like, well, that's a pretty great deal.
Why not add to the collection and have the option to watch it one day, even if...
So at some point in the past... At some point in the past, I went back to Highlander. I did the whole Highlander deep dive. Like I said, not a lot of it has stuck with me, just because the quality can #PP. The quality can ebb and flow pretty heavily.
This is what's so wild to me about this franchise. Okay, so we've covered Mortal Kombat and Mortal Kombat Annihilation on this podcast. Mortal Kombat 1. Hit movie, pretty well liked by general audiences. Obviously, there's a built-in fan base with video games. They make a sequel that is laughed out of theaters, makes no money, and then that franchise is dead, right? Like, there's not a third movie. It's not even straight to video. I guess there is a TV show, but I don't think it's the same continuity that Mortal Kombat Conquest. But that kills the franchise. That's kind of what you typically see happen with a rushed, poorly received sequel. This movie has what is considered by many to be the worst or one of the worst sequels of all time. And it persists with another sequel in a TV show and all the things that we mentioned already. It's baffling that it's just unwilling to die, but I guess maybe that is the point, considering the series is about immortal beings. This movie, Andrew, Highlander 2, The Quickening. It's released November 1st, 1991. At least that's the US release. It's made on a budget of $34 million. At the box office, it only brings in $15.5 million. That is the US box office, and that is the only figures I can find. I even went to Box Office Mojo, look for international. We know this movie was released in multiple territories. I only have the numbers for the first movie, but even with the worldwide take, I don't think it's making its budget back. It is considered a financial failure. Critically, it has the legendary 0% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. That is our theme for this month, Andrew. And look, we've talked a lot about Rotten Tomatoes. It's really integrated into what we do here, our podcast, and judging how things are received. And you and I have both sort of lamented about how a lot of people treat Rotten Tomatoes and misunderstand what Rotten Tomatoes is doing and thinks that Rotten Tomatoes is giving the score and it's just an amalgamation. You know, we've been down this road. One thing that I personally and typically not a fan of on Rotten Tomatoes is their little tagline that they add to summarize the score, because it's like the only bit of editorializing that they do. You know what I mean? Like Rotten Tomatoes doesn't review things, they just collect them. But by putting a little blurb that summarizes the critics, it gives them a little leeway to put their own spin on things. And I think Rotten Tomatoes should stay out of that. All that is to say, I love the byline for Highlander 2. 0% critic score, and they simply write, there should have only been one.
That is
that is good.
If there is a pop culture definition that has persisted of this movie, that is the joke, basically, is that there can be only one was, it's like the joke I've heard before that, when Pinhead says your suffering will be legendary even in hell, he's talking about watching the Hellraiser franchise. But yeah, in this one, it's always been the joke of yes, there should have been only one because, and then again, 6 seasons of a television show, that doesn't happen by accident. So.
I'm reminded of The Last Airbender, where fans of the TV show will often say, there is no movie in Ba Sing Se. We just ignore the adaptation. Doing my research, I went down some Reddit rabbit holes of the Highlander subreddit, and very often people, someone's like, hey, which version of Highlander 2 should I watch? And they're like, what? They didn't make a sequel. What are you talking about? Just running joke that we just ignore all sequels to Highlander. It is a bit funny. Let's take a look at the creative team here, Andrew. The movie's written by Peter Bellwood, who was a returning writer from that first movie. And that is certainly his highest credits, being a writer on Highlander and Highlander 2. Although notably, there is a couple of story by credits here, one of which is by Brian Clemens, who I dug through their filmography. I think it's safe to say that they are B-movie type writer, and I don't mean like bad movie. I mean intentionally like campy, grindhousey type films. One that caught my eye was Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. Andrew, I'm gonna find this movie and I'm gonna watch it. It is a Hammer film, and it's very simply the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde story, but Hyde is a woman. And I'll be honest, I thought it was gonna be like, like exploitation skin flick, but it seems to be pretty straightforward and very well liked, and I can't wait to find that.
There is a movie called Dr. Jekyll and Mrs. Hyde, made much later, starring Sean Young as Mrs. Hyde, and the idea is, it's a man that turns into a woman. But yeah, that looks... I thought it was going to be a nun, and I thought that was going to be even cooler. But
is it like a monster nun, or he just turns into a nun?
Just turns into a nun. Or like, I guess, like, I don't know. I have no idea what the execution was in my head, but I heard Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, and I just saw, like, nunsploitation movie in my head. I was like, man. But that would have been awesome. But... yeah, he's got a couple of, a lot of like Hammer horror stuff. If you look back in like his filmography, it looks like he was in that circle. He's got some interesting stuff in here too. Like he's got See No Evil, which is a psychological horror thriller with Mia Farrow. Like there's some gems buried in what he's got here. But this is one of his last credits and also one of his first credits in a long time. Which I think is interesting. I really would be interested to see like what his kind of, how he comes to be in this kind of circle for Highlander 2, because like he's got a movie in 1980 called The Watcher in the Woods that comes out that is I guess a supernatural horror film that he writes with a couple of different people, and then it's a full decade. And then his next film is Highlander 2. Now, he's got other stuff in the interim. He's got some plays that he wrote. It looks like he's got some television stuff as well. But, yeah, I guess that was mostly what he was doing in the 80s was theater stuff. But I wasn't able to really find anything, but I would just be curious how he got into the Highlander circle.
Brian Clemens had passed away in 2015, so big RAP to him. We have another story by credit for William Panzer, and he's simply just a producer on this entire franchise. He's really got his hands on Highlander up and down the movies and the TV shows, so he pops up always as a producer, occasionally as a story by credit. So he seemingly helped guide, at least in part, this story. Also did pass away in 2007, so another RAP.
Yeah, he's got writing credits on Highlander 2, Highlander 4, and also Highlander The Final Dimension, which I guess is also Highlander 3. Yeah, original title Highlander 3 The Sorcerer. I guess we changed the title of Highlander 3 to The Final Dimension at some point. Guess what? I bet that dimension's not very final. But anyway, yeah, so it looks like, looking at his filmography, it's like 90% Highlander. It's like that's his thing.
Good work if you can get it, Andrew.
It is indeed. It is indeed. Looking at you, Sean S. Cunningham.
The movie is, of course, directed by Russell Mulcahy, returning from the first film, and alum of the show, as he also directed The Shadow, a movie we've covered previously. He is also the director of Resident Evil Extinction, a movie we will, let's be honest, probably cover in the future.
He also directed the kind of horror film Razorback, which was the one that kind of led into Highlander. It's kind of wild to have essentially the writer and director of Highlander come back for this. It's very uncommon. Obviously, then there also is like a decent gap between. Like, obviously, they wanted this a lot faster, but it took a long time to develop, which I think kind of adds to the weird nature of it even more for some people, where it's like, okay, cool, you sat and cooked for 5 years, and this is what you came up with. They were kind of a little confused by that.
The movie does
a little bit of the
stuck in development hell, and it's unclear if that's creative. And a big issue, and what leads to so many versions, is that the first movie is so moderately successful, and they pre-sold the distribution rights for the sequel, and a lot of different investment companies get their piece of the pie in various territories. Mm-hmm. So the UK release has its own investors, US has its own investors, and a few more smaller markets throughout the world are all on board. And by doing that, it gives them sort of like executive producer level power over this movie. It takes a long time to get out there, and as the movie goes into the cutting and editing phase, they all kind of get their hands in there and chop the film up and make it to their liking. Russell Mulcahy does not have final word, final cut of this. There's stories that he walked out of the premiere. Christopher Lambert himself is said to have not been happy with where the production eventually started going towards the end of things. So, very tumultuous process. It's pretty hard to kind of suss out what Mulcahy and the writer's original intention is. So I guess now's a good time to talk about these different cuts, Andrew. It seems
I do want to mention one of the more interesting things I do find about Russell Mulcahy's filmography is his involvement with the MTV version of Teen Wolf. I don't know if you guys know this, but MTV did a television series of Teen Wolf that ran from 2011 to 2017. He's the director of at least 20 episodes of that.
And does he do
several
the movie?
Seasons? And he does the movie that follows. Yeah, he does the movie that follows. But like, he directs the first 3 episodes and the last 3 episodes of season 1, the first 2 episodes of season 2, like 3 or 4 more episodes that season. Like, every season he's coming in for like 4 or 5 episodes through the entire run of that show. I do not know how, Russell Mulcahy was like, in 1990 or 2011 rather, was like not a young man, I guess. It just seems odd that that's something that he would do. I guess he wasn't that old. But he had a huge involvement with that, directed tons of episodes. And I didn't know that. I don't even know if we talked about it on the Shadow or just mentioned it in passing, but I did not realize quite how involved his involvement was.
Did you watch that version of Teen Wolf, Andrew?
I'd seen it a little bit. I just saw that it kept going, and it was another thing where I was like, is there something to this? Like, and I'm sure it's got its fans. I know that MTV did a Scream series that I watched the first episode and I was like, man, this is so trashy and cheap. Better see who the killer is. Like, I just immediately had to keep watching, despite the fact knowing that it was so like low rent. And then season 2 ended on a cliffhanger that never got resolved, and I'm not happy about it. But thanks MTV. But anyway, yeah, just a weird thing for a man in his 60s to end up doing.
So this movie has 2 main original cuts. There's a UK release, UK theatrical release, and a US theatrical release. Different run times and scenes in different orders and various small differences. Now, by total coincidence, Andrew, it seems that you and I both watched different versions. I think I watched the UK version on YouTube because the original theatrical releases are not available to purchase on home video or digital.
They're not in print, I should say. They probably were out there.
VHS. I think they didn't make it beyond VHS. Andrew, you watched the US version also on YouTube.
Yes.
Story-wise, I think we saw the same story.
Yes.
But Mulcahy does get his director's cut a few years after this, known as the Renegade Cut. And that cuts out large story elements that people were not happy with and changes things a bit. And then there's a special edition that comes out in the early 2000s that is basically the Renegade Cut from what I can tell, but they added some CG. They George Lucas did. They added some CG effects and changed things a little bit to spruce it up a bit. And those 2 cuts are the main ones you can find on DVD or Blu-ray. Like I said, theatrical, don't think makes it out of the VHS era, but you can, thankfully watch them on YouTube as we
It can be found. Yeah, because I went to a disc replay. Don't know if you guys have those in Houston. But they're just a used video store. And it's only movies, like movies, video games, and stuff. I'm sure there's like Games Exchange. If you guys have any of those, it's a similar idea. But
it's only movies, like movies and video games and stuff.
Yeah, only movies. There's no books, I guess was what I was really getting at there. It's not like a Half Price Books, but I went to a Half Price Books, and there's 2 Half Price Books that have a disc replay in the same shopping center as them near me, and I always found that really weird because I don't know how they both persist. But I went to both, and I looked for Highlander stuff, and the Half Price Books just didn't have anything Highlander on it at all. But I went to the disc replay, and they had like 6 copies of Highlander 2, the Renegade Cut on DVD. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, does it include the theatrical? No, it doesn't. It's not there. Yeah, and then they had like, they did 2 copies of Highlander, the original, but it was also, I think, the director's cut of the original Highlander. So I'm just kind of like, just not going to get to watch this, are you, Andrew? And then I was like kind of lamenting, and I was like, even when I was looking for like the high seas, like, I didn't find anything. Like, I can't, like, there's nothing active with Cedars out there of the original Highlander 2 theatrical. And I was like, how am I going to watch this? Like, and so I finally, like, was like, oh, if nobody cares, then it's probably on YouTube. And it was.
You would think we would figure all this out before we decide what movies we're covering and announce it to everybody. But sometimes, days before we record, we have to solve this problem.
I guess your brain just assumes that a movie like Highlander 2 is going to be out there. Like, you don't assume that it's going to be
if
like...
you have to, sure.
Yeah, like, rent it or, like, whatever. But, like, everything I found was, like, the Renegade Cut. And I was like, man, we really did George Lucas this. Like, we didn't just focus on the Renegade version. We, like, deleted the existence of the theatrical. So... what we're basically saying is none of you can watch the version we did legally.
I mean, I guess
YouTube
technically it's not legal on YouTube, but come on, you're not getting in trouble for streaming it on YouTube. Andrew, let's just jump into this movie. Let's talk about it. The theatrical story, of course. Jump into it and talk about our favorite scenes, everything it does well, everything we like about Highlander 2, The Quickening. You ready?
Yeah.
Connor MacLeod is an immortal being who was banished to Earth hundreds of years ago, along with a handful of others from the planet Zeist. Over the course of human history, they battled each other until only Connor remained, and he was awarded the prize. This would allow him to live the rest of his days on Earth as a mortal, finally capable of aging and dying, or returning to his home planet. Not willing to allow Connor to return home, the corrupt Zeist general Katana sends assassins to finish McLeod, but he is victorious in the fight and in the process regains his youth and immortality and resurrects his fellow Zeist outcast Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez. Meanwhile, the Earth is protected by a giant mechanical shield that was funded by McLeod 25 years ago after the ozone layer was destroyed. When McLeod learns that the ozone layer has repaired itself, he seeks to destroy the corporation that is profiting from the shield and have it dismantled. Katana travels to Earth himself to kill McLeod, and the two must fight to the death, because there can be only one, Andrew. Boy, oh boy.
There's a lot going on here.
I wrote that. I'm like, yeah, I think I got everything. Then I was like, oh yeah, there's a shield. I guess I gotta mention that. Like, there's this movie is bonkers. I honestly, so I write these synopses myself. I just kind of take a stab at summarizing the movie. You know, I don't copy it off the back of a DVD or anything. But this plot element of let's see, the prize allows him to be immortal or travel home and have his crimes forgiven. I got that off the Wikipedia. I don't remember that being in the movie, because it seems like if that is an option, he chose to die instead. He's an old man. Like, he's decided not to travel home. So why does Katana want to kill him if there's no risk of him coming home? Am I missing something, Andrew?
You're not really missing anything. The implication seems to largely be that Katana just thinks he's going to come back because that's what Katana thinks. Like, that there's not really any, like, you know, because, you know, McLeod even says to him at one point, like, I'm not coming back. And he's like, oh, aren't you? And he's like, no, I clearly haven't come back. Like, there's like a whole, like, awkward conversation where I think they're at his wife's grave where they talk about how he's like, you're never coming back to Zeist. And he's like, I don't want to go back to Zeist. And he's like, oh, you don't want to go back to Zeist? He's like, why would, like, basically, Katana's stance is like, why wouldn't you? And don't get me wrong, the movie does not dive super deep into that. It also, it's best not to think about it too much.
I mean, there's more questions I have about the plot, and we will, you know, our goal here is to talk about the things that we like, but we've got to jump a little bit into how this fits into the first one. We will discuss it, but Andrew, before we get to any scenes, we got to talk about the cast, as we always do. And we're going to start with the high point, the best casting, best performance of the film, because every episode, we recognize one person who goes so far above and beyond the call of duty that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, I want you to kick us off, and I'm thinking we're going to have the same pick here. For me, there's someone that's head and shoulders above, and I'm really excited to hear if we agree. Andrew, who gets your Mark Strong Award for Highlander 2?
There is a person in this cast who is chewing every bit of scenery he possibly can. He is leaning into all of the wacky nature of this story and everything as much as humanly possible. And Chris, you know I love my villains. And so I have to go with Michael Ironside as General Katana. Yes,
hell yes. Yes.
He is. It's so funny because, one, he has long hair in this movie, which is just not the vision of Michael Ironside I have in my head. Like, obviously, I just see him as this grizzled, like Starship Troopers is how I see Michael Ironside. Like that's
a general army, a military type. Right.
Like, just like a hardened, like, older guy, like, just like no nonsense, straight up. So to see him like cheesing it up, like in Highlander 2, is like such a stark departure, and like you honestly like you don't really see him do this very often. Like, you know, most of the time he's somebody that's definitely gotten a little typecast as he's gotten older, where like you just kind of pick him when you need that older grizzled guy that kind of like just adds a little bit of, what's that word?
Gravitas.
Yeah, that.
It had been a minute, Andrew. I had to
ramp up for that one. So like seeing him here, and like there's stuff where he's definitely played the villain before. I don't want to act like he hasn't done that. I mean, the next Karate Kid, he's one of the villains, but he's so here, just to see him like straight up, not just as the villain, but like leaning into all these ridiculous whims and all of the things that he's doing and having a blast with it, having deep, intimate knowledge of what life on Earth is like, despite the fact he's never been here before.
Yeah, it's one thing that the aliens speak English, but he's like making pop culture references and using turns of phrase that
He's like at one point he sees Ramirez and McLeod together and he's like, oh, it's like a high school reunion in here. I was like, how do you even know what high school is? Like, what are you talking about?
Maybe Zeiss is just like Earth, Andrew.
Maybe. It didn't look like it when they showed it. But anyway, despite that, he is having an absolute blast at every turn here. Like the weird, just like psychopathic nature of the character where he shows up to like the Shield's corporate meeting and just kills one of their guys while staring John C. McGinley straight in the face. Like, and then John C. McGinley just being like, okay, I guess you're on the team now. Like, there's just wild, unhinged energy going through all of this, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. I think he's making the most of every single scene that he's in. If there's somebody who quote unquote understands the assignment, I think it is Michael Ironside to the 10th degree. If this were I don't think there's a single way any version of this movie is not MVP'd by Michael Ironside. So to me, in a clear head above the rest situation, Michael Ironside as General Katana is the Mark Strong Award winner of Highlander 2.
Yeah, of course. I mean, this franchise puts Christopher Lambert on the map, and I guess if someone told me he was the Mark Strong Award winner for any of these movies he's in, I don't think it's crazy. But I'm having the most fun with Michael Ironside, and Highlander 2 notably has an overall more comedic tone than the first one. The first one is pretty deadly serious. Like, it's campy and cheesy, but it takes it all pretty seriously. There's maybe some quips, but this one is out and out comedic at many top points. From some of the characters to a lot of what Michael Ironside is doing. The scene with him and the taxi driver, I love. Definitely be talking about that later. But he's really dialed into this movie's tone. And I know that the tone shift is what a lot of people don't like about this movie, and understandable, but this guy, as we say, understood the assignment. I think he's really tuned in to where this production was heading for one way or another, and he's making the most of it. He's having a blast. And when I see an actor having fun on screen, it makes me have fun watching it. I mean, he stands out in the best way possible in this movie, so I'm, of course, agreeing 100%. Michael Ironside, welcome to the Hall of Strong, sir. Very, very well deserved. As I mentioned, Christopher Lambert. He is Connor McLeod. He is the face of this franchise for many. Andrew, let me tell you something. I watched the first Highlander yesterday, and I believe we talked about this on the podcast. I think you mentioned this, because we've talked about Christopher Lambert with Mortal Kombat, and again with Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance, I think he shows up in. And you said that he kind of looks like Thomas Jane, which is rare for you to make. Usually I'm saying this person, actor looks like that person, but you were like, he kind of looks like Thomas Jane. And I Googled it, saw a lot of comparisons. I people think the same thing. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I can see it. Dude, that first Highlander movie, he looks just like Thomas Jane. Like, you could tell me this is Thomas Jane in this movie, and I'd be like, yeah, clearly.
I'm not crazy,
Thomas Jane.
man.
Look at
I'm
him.
Really
like,
not.
I think I saw it most watching that first one, because I'm not doing no research. I'm just guessing Christopher Lambert's age is pretty close to Thomas Jane and like Deep Blue Sea or The Punisher, where I most know him from. And the hairline, the brow, like everything, they look it's unreal. And then you go to Highlander 2, which is a few years later, and all of a sudden Christopher Lambert is Raiden. Now I see now he's got the longer hair. His voice totally changes. It's so bizarre. That first movie, again, he sounds like Thomas Jane. Here, he's got his Raiden voice, his distinct, raspy Raiden voice that is so weird, and it just comes out of nowhere this guy is fascinating. I also read that whenever he was first considered for the first Highlander, he did not speak English. And that is like someone brand new to the language in the first Highlander, which is insanely impressive. He does like multiple accents in that movie, and it's wild. Anyway, big takeaway here. Christopher Lambert and Thomas Jane, my God, they look exactly the same. It's unreal. These people aren't related. I still like Christopher Lambert in this movie. Again, I think he becomes Christopher Lambert. The version of this guy, that's a weird way to say it, but he just becomes the version of Christopher Lambert that I grew up with in Mortal Kombat and I love, and he's so funny and cheesy and campy and all those things. He's really dialed in. He's got the long hair. Like, it's funny, like, to me, this long-haired Highlander with the trench coat, like, this is my version, my vision of what this character looks like. But he never really dressed it like this in the first movie. He's only got long hair in the flashbacks. Funny how these things work out. Like, you know, Jason doesn't wear the mask till 3.
I was going to say, I was about to be like, yeah, it would be like if Jason doesn't actually wear the hockey mask until Friday the 13th Part 3.
The most iconic shot in the Alien franchise comes in Alien 3. Like, it's weird how these things happen. He's great though. He again is mostly deadly serious here, dialing into the camp, but not outwardly comedic like Michael Ironside or even John C. McGinley. So in that way, it's a little bit thankless because the other characters I think I have more fun with, but he's still a believable badass. The action scenes are great, and I really like Christopher Lambert. Lambert, I continue to say, but Andrew.
Do you want me to explain why I think...
yeah, let's hear it.
Because you may have noticed, Chris, that a production company listed for this film was Lamb Bear Entertainment.
Interesting. I did not notice
Lamb
that.
Bear Entertainment has 2 films to its credit, both of which star Christopher Lambert.
Okay. So this is his...
production company.
Production company?
Yes.
And he chose to call it Lamb Bear, like the animals, lamb and bear.
Yes.
Andrew, this is pretty damning evidence. I think I might need to start saying Lamb Bear. That's pretty good.
The only other movie they have a name on, to be fair, there's only 2, is a movie called Night Moves with a K, because it's a movie about chess. He plays a chess grandmaster, I think. And it's like a weird, like, murder mystery crime movie, like, basically a chess grandmaster's in a big tournament, and like his lover's found painted up and like the blood's drained out of her body, and so there's this big investigation. It's really wild, but
okay.
It's
I just
so
love
like
the
it turns
idea
into like
that
a
he
weird
was like, I'm so tired of people mispronouncing my name. I'm gonna name my company the phonetic pronunciation of my last name so that we can finally settle this.
Hey, it finally settled it here. So
the third time we talk about the actor, it's finally been settled. Yeah,
because you kept not believing me.
Fine, fair enough. Well, what do you think of Christopher Lambert in this film, Andrew?
I think he's doing. Yeah, he's got to kind of be the center of all of this, kind of the center of all the weirdness that's happening. Obviously, he's got a lot of different relationships with characters in this movie. He's pushing it forward. He does a good job with it. Like I said, he doesn't really get to have quite as much, I guess, like, fun with it as everybody else is, because, you know, even with, like, you know, we'll talk about Sean Connery in a second, but like his character is getting to do the kind of fish out of water stuff, and like obviously with Katana he's just enjoying the scenery chewing of all of this, but like Lambert is like playing McLeod as like this weary old man who also kind of feels like he destroyed the world, because he has this guilt for helping to create the shield that is basically pseudo enslaved humanity as far as he's concerned. And he kind of says that it doesn't bother him, but at the same time, you know that he like regrets that this is what it's become. And so the weariness that he plays in the early film when he's old, obviously he gets reborn in a scene I'm sure we'll talk about later. But I think he's doing a good job with everything that he's got to kind of juggle here between the weariness and the older version, kind of turning back into the younger version. All of the different pieces of the story that are happening, obviously with Katana, and then split with the shield stuff. He's juggling a lot of things, but I think he does a good job with it.
Sean Connery is in this film, as we've discussed. Alum of the show, of course, Sean Connery from The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and Diamonds Are Forever during a 007 month. Probably a Mark Strong Award winner. I gotta imagine at least one of those movies we gave him Mark Strong, but Andrew, there's no way to check. So I'm just gonna say probable Mark Strong Award winner. Legendary actor, Sean Connery. This is, we've discussed him many times in the podcast, and I've remarked that his distinct way of speaking seems to be more pronounced as his career goes on. 1991, he's leaning into it. We've reached the era where he is definitely leaning into what he is known for. I love that how old is Sean Connery in 1991, Andrew? Let's see. He's born in 1930.
61.
Oh, boy.
61.
Born in 1930. Crazy. 61. Still charismatic and charming as hell. Like, he's still James Bond. It's wild. They give him that long flowing hair.
It's funny to me that Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is 2 years before this.
Where he's playing his dad.
where he's playing aged Indiana Jones's father with like the full on bald with no hesitation or anything. And it's amazing that in this movie, just 2 years later than that, he puts on the charm and he just looks, and he doesn't seem out of place. He doesn't seem,
not at all. Yeah.
Fun fact.
Yes.
This is the only other character he ever reprised beyond James Bond. This is the only other time he's played a character again. Throughout his career, obviously he played James Bond 7 or 8 times. No way to check that either. But this is obviously there was a lot of people that thought he might get pulled into Indiana Jones 4 or something like that. A lot of people thought, I think he would reprise that role, but he opted not to. In Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, they opted for like a photo cameo instead. And then Dial of Destiny, I believe he'd passed away before that came out. He definitely passed away before that came out. But yeah, this ends up being the only other instance where he reprised a character in another film. Which is strange to think about. And so I can only assume the dump truck that was backed up to his house was sizable for him to do that, because yeah, it's an odd thing. It's of all the things to reprise, you would assume like something like Indiana Jones would have come way before Highlander. But
I love that his character's name is Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez. Clearly, like the way he dresses in that name, he's like a Spanish conquistador. Even though it's clear like he's been through all of human history, and I think his sword has like Japanese origins and stuff. Like
it's a katana.
It's clear what they're doing there, but. During his death scene, spoilers, he has a big sacrifice scene. They play bagpipes. Like, they just play up the fact that he's clearly Scottish. That's neither here nor there. This is a great performance. It's another one that is clearly on the comedic side. Like you said, fish out of water. He gets resurrected, and he hasn't been alive for hundreds of years, so modern society is new to him. And comedy ensues in a very Austin Powers style. And it's fun. It's great. Weird use of Sean Connery. I would say in the first one, he's leaning some gravitas to like this small independent film, and he's not in too many scenes, but he's only in the flashbacks and he's memorable. Whereas here, it's just like, well, we got to have Sean Connery again. Let's find a way to do it. And Andrew, this is the first of probably many questions about how these two films relate. In that first movie, it's very clear that McLeod does not know he is immortal until he suffers a fatal wound that does not kill him. He gets banished from his village because they suspect him of witchcraft. Sean Connery, as another immortal, finds him and explains the deal. He's like, here's the deal. We're immortal. We're destined to have these fights throughout time. There could be only one. He trains him. They clearly meet and have this mentor relationship.
Yes.
That I texted you. It really...
Actually, fun fact, the subtitle of the first Highlander actually was almost Highlander, Here's the Deal. So,
Here's the deal.
Here's the deal. Man, I'm so funny.
There's the scene where they're like running on the beach a la Rocky 3. And I'm like, just kiss. Just come on.
No,
I mean, if you are immortal...
You've definitely tried it.
You're pansexual. There's no way to be a...
You have definitely tried it.
100%.
You've definitely tried it.
Okay. That's my biggest complaint about the first one.
That's our takeaway from Highlander. You've definitely thought about it at least.
You've been there. You've fallen in love with many a person. What was I talking about, Andrew? Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. So in this one, it is revealed very casually. Like, I watched the scenes early on and then had to like read some synopsis to make sure I'm digesting everything. Very casually that they first met on the planet Zeist. They're actually aliens who were banished to Earth, and that's how they're immortal. And Sean Connery's character of Juan Sanchez and Connor McLeod knew each other, and they created a bond before they were banished here. So they knew each other before they ever made it to Earth. This has to be the biggest retcon of the first one, right? I mean, this upends everything we know about Connor, unless like he was banished to Earth and had his mind wiped, which is never explicitly said. Because how do they not know they know each other?
He says something in like a throwaway moment when they're about to be banished. He says something like they're both going to get banished to Earth, and he says something. I can't remember exactly what the phrasing is, but it's like he's like, "Well, am I going to be able to find you?" Or like, "Will I see you again?" And he's like, "Not at first." So like there seems to be this sort of kind of hidden idea that you're going to get sent to Earth and you're going to forget who you are. Which in McLeod's case makes sense because he doesn't know he's immortal, so it lends some credence to that. And then maybe with Ramirez, the idea is he's in the same boat, and then eventually, just by the nature of them being immortals, they will eventually end up back in the same place. But that's definitely one of the biggest changes. Just changing the lore of the immortals was definitely probably the biggest change of taking them from being this kind of immortal race on Earth to technically being aliens that are banished to Earth. And the Renegade cut like really tries to undo this by basically saying that the immortal civilization was like predates written record, so like they existed basically in the ancient past. I don't really know how it works in the Renegade cut. I don't remember. I don't know quite how they juggle this, but I can't imagine that it comes off very well, because the idea of the base issue is that Katana waiting so long to do anything about them is going to seem strange no matter what.
Yeah.
And so #PP, but like, that's definitely the biggest change, is just changing the lore of the immortals into being aliens. But this idea that like, and then they even go further by like the quickening is a relationship established between them, and that allows him to call on Ramirez whenever he may need his help, which is how they reconcile.
Even in death, they make a point to say that. Even in death,
they make a point, so that way again Ramirez can come back in the present, which is odd because I say this as nicely as I can. He doesn't really do anything in the present. Like ultimately, Sean Connery's contributions to the mission are pretty minimal. So it's a little interesting that, like, obviously you wanted his name on the poster for selling purposes. You wanted people to be like, oh, Sean Connery's in this. But, like, he ultimately doesn't do a whole lot.
Most of his screen time is him traveling to catch up to McLeod, and they finally reunite together for a short time. Yeah, but so what do you think of Sean Connery's performance here? I mean, he's in that first movie, he's a little cheeky. But I think he really leans into the comedy here. I had a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. Like he's like the suit scene where he needs a suit and he's got an earring that's apparently so valuable that it will get him a suit in 3 hours. And also a plane ticket to America. Like somehow.
Sure. Yeah, that's how Batman did it in The Dark Knight Returns. He had the earring in the pit.
Yeah, that's exactly Jesus Christ. But otherwise, he's clearly having a blast, just kind of, showing up. I guarantee you they shot all of his stuff before he meets McLeod. You just shoot with him, so it's easy to shoot that whenever. I'm sure this dude his screen time is probably 10, 15 minutes tops. It's probably not a lot, but they pepper it throughout the film so that you get a good dose of Connery, but he's having a blast clearly with what's going on. But they clearly just make the character Scottish now. Like he's obviously he reappears in Scotland because that's where he died. But they just straight up were like, he's Scottish now.
Of course. Virginia Madsen plays Louise Marcus. This is Christopher Lambert's character's, I guess, new love interest, kind of. Well, I guess not kind of, full on new love interest. But she's integral to the plot of the whole shield and ozone layer. She is the one saying, like, no, the ozone layer has fixed itself. We can get rid of the shield, and comes to him for help to have it torn down, and eventually they are successful. Another role that is thankless is too far, but her character is, delivering this important plot stuff and does not a lot of room to be like, fun, but she's along for the ride, for the action. She's never stolen by the villain to be a damsel in distress. She gets to be one of the heroes, which is always nice to see.
Yeah, obviously Virginia Madsen has a legendary career in her own right. Candyman probably standing out as another big moment. But yeah, so she's the head of this Cobalt group, the group that's trying to kind of destroy the shield and they're the ones that believe the shield is unnecessary at this point, that the ozone has repaired itself, the radiation levels are not dangerous anymore, and so they're kind of heading up this kind of insurgency against shield, trying to prove that we don't need it anymore, while John C. McGinley's character is kind of heading up shield and trying to basically extort the world for money, which it's a good thing stuff like that doesn't happen now. It's anyway, so yeah, it's an interesting character. She gets in on the action a little bit at the end, gets to do some stuff, take out some bad guys. She's a little bit of a side character throughout most of the events unfolding throughout the body of the film, just as all the different pieces are kind of falling into place with various things. But you still get some moments to kind of dive into Connor a little bit, ask him about his past. He gets to talk about some of his other wives, which is a super romantic thing to do, my understanding. Yeah. Perfectly good performance.
Andrew, Mark Strong award winner from just last week. John C. McGinley, he plays David Blake. He's the leader of if there's ever been a evil corporation in a movie, nameless faceless evil corporation, it's this one here that is in charge of the shield, making money from literally every country on Earth to protect humanity from the sun. And of course, because they make money off of it, they have no intention of ever bringing it down, even if it's no longer necessary. My version of the movie opened with the year is 2024. I was like, yes it is. And then it had this exposition about how we have polluted so much that the ozone layer has been destroyed. We created a shield to protect humanity, but it's now believed that the ozone layer has repaired itself. It's like a small group now believes ozone layer has repaired itself. And I'm just thinking, like, okay, year 2024, there's a climate crisis and competing ideas about whether or not it's real. And hats off to these writers in 1991 to really nail the year 2024. It is, Andrew, it is depressing. But John C. McGinley continues to be fantastic. We praised the hell out of him last week. There's not too much new to say about him as a person or as a whole or his career, but I really like him here. I mean, if there was more screen time, he could maybe give a run, Michael Ironside a run for the money for Mark Strong Award. He plays smarmy so damn well, just to be so hateable and pretentious. What's the word? Talk down to somebody.
Condescending.
Thank you so much, Andrew. He's very good at being condescending with a smile. It's what he becomes known for on Scrubs. He's great, hilarious. There's a note in the Wikipedia that he says he intentionally lowered his voice to try to sound like Orson Welles, but regretted it. He just sounds like John C. McGinley to me. I didn't know what that is even a reference to. I think he is just classic McGinley. He's hilarious. I loved every time he was on screen.
Yeah, I read that too, and I was just like, I don't know what you're talking about, dude. Like, you don't sound
too hard on yourself.
Like, it's like, it doesn't sound anything like Orson Welles to me, and I've heard Orson Welles speak quite a good bit. But it's he's just fine, but he's not in the movie very much. John C. McGinley, like, just what a range. Like, truly, honestly, like, the man can be funny. He can be like you take this and contrast it to something like Office Space, where like they're both kind of villains, but like the way the Office Space guy like is just a bumbling kind of, corporate do-gooder, just like like the guy at the office that sits in a management position that you can't stand because he's in that position and he says dumb things all the time. Whereas this, where he's just like a smarmy, evil corporate mastermind, and you're just like, and he just slides in between with no issue. It's pretty wild, but yeah, and even just contrasted to last week in Wagons East compared to this, just like two completely different performances doing two completely different things, and he does a great job. He's John C. McGinley. He's just, I mean, God, he's probably got maybe less than 10 minutes of screen time throughout this movie, if even that. It's a pretty gnarly death, though, so he's got that going for him, which is nice.
It's good stuff, Andrew. I think that covers our main players. We can maybe touch on some more as we dive into scenes, but I think it's time we do just that. Jump into the scenes of this film. And of course, we're going to start by talking about the best scene of the movie, or at least our personal favorite. So, Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders? What is the best scene in Highlander 2, The Quickening?
I have to go with Katana's arrival on Earth.
So
this is just
bonkers,
just so manic and ridiculous. I love it. So basically, it's one of the things in the movie that they play really fast and loose with. Just this notion that like the immortals can travel from Zeist to Earth super easily. They just teleport here, and so like the movie begins, and we get two guys that come in to try to kill McLeod, and he manages to kill both of them, which is what allows him to return to his youthful appearance. And ultimately bring Ramirez back as well. But Katana arrives very much in the same way, but he like crashes into the ground and then lands on a subway. So the momentum of him coming to Earth was powerful enough to go through the street and through the top of the subway, but not through the bottom of the subway, which I appreciate.
Yeah. What's that floor made out of?
Yeah, I don't know, but it's
great weld job.
Great job. They don't build them like they used to. But anyway, and so everybody on the train's like, what? And everybody's confused and nobody really has any idea what's going on. And so Katana stands up and just like has no idea what's going on, doesn't know where he is for a minute at least. And then like just at this point, the energy of Katana has mostly been kind of subdued, kind of more in line with what I'd kind of assume a Michael Ironside performance is like, just kind of gravelly, menacing, just kind of watching from afar as other people take care of it. The real dark side type thing. And this is where it like gets unleashed, and the full energy of Katana is basically presented, where he's just leaning into every single turn. And this sequence is a great example of that, where he basically like he walks up to this one guy and he grabs his jacket and he's like, nice material. And then like steals his jacket and kills him. What do you know? How do you know what the material is, man? I don't understand.
My favorite is he's walking to like the what do you call it? The cockpit of the subway train, and he picks up this little like 12-year-old kid, lifts him off the ground, and says, "Bet you've always wanted to drive one of these, huh? Me too." Sets him down and continues walking. Like, why did he lift him up? Why did he say that? How has he always wanted to drive a subway train if he's from Planet Zeist?
Just like unbelievable. Like, I have no idea how that happens, but
and to be clear, hey. I don't care. I don't care that he's making references he shouldn't make. Like, this is the most fun of the movie.
Yeah, I absolutely don't care that he's making all these jokes. It's because he makes a whole bunch of them. I don't even remember all of them, but it's unbelievable. So this sequence, and then basically he takes over the train and he just like crashes it. He like runs it super, super fast. Everybody's crashing and falling.
Why can't it even go that fast? Like, people are literally like holding onto a pole and they're completely vertical. It's going so fast. There's a special effect where one guy's like skin is being pulled back on his face and his eyes are popping out. It's like, why are we going so hard on this?
I have no idea, but I'm so glad they did. Yeah, I am so absolutely glad they did. It is insane. It is ridiculous. And you've now got the complete template for what Katana is going to be through the rest of this movie. And I love it.
It's great. It's a lot of fun. I love this pick. I don't know if you can call it a tone shift or what, but this locks into something in this movie that I mean, you said it best. When Michael Ironside comes to Earth, like, he takes it to another level. He's kind of just been menacing and evil up until then, but when he arrives on Earth, he's having fun. I don't know why his character makes that change or why the movie makes that change, but it's what I like most about it. So again, I'm not complaining. The subway ride is insane, where he just crashes through up onto the city streets and leaves the subway. It's great. This is a great pick, Andrew. I'm going to go with a different one, but we will be talking about more Ironside shortly, I assure you. But my favorite scene, what I'm picking as my favorite, does not include the character of Katana. I'm going to go with McLeod killing the two assassins that are sent to take him out. So Katana sends these two characters this is maybe the first inkling that this movie has a comedic tone, because these two characters that he sends from Zeiss, they look weird. They wear goggles. They're very bird-like, like in their mannerisms. They're always like twitching and moving their heads and talking kind of fast. I was reminded of, it's like a mix of three things. It reminds me a bit of the twins from Matrix Reloaded. I can definitely see how these Highlander movies are probably an influence in the Wachowski style later on, with this neo-noir lighting and everything. But I'm reminded kind of those characters, just two similar-looking assassins with long hair going straight back. I'm also reminded of the general aesthetic of the Super Mario Bros. Movie, the dinosaur-type characters.
Yep.
And then lastly, I'm reminded of the ooze bird people from the Power Rangers movie. With the, purple beaks and everything. Did you just look that up, or did you pull that out of your brain?
No, I
Andrew?
knew that.
That's
I
impressive.
knew that.
That's impressive. Yeah, I'm reminded of all three of those at once. Like, it's very, like, a character like these, they would never be in that first movie. It takes itself way too seriously. This is clearly meant to be like dumb henchman trope, almost in a kid's movie, like, based on some of the references I just made. So they are sent to take out McLeod. And again, McLeod is mortal now. He's an old man. He doesn't have the skills and abilities that he once did. So they fight in this, like, I would call it an alley, but it's a bit bigger than that. But it's in this, downtown Metropolis cityscape. And it is pretty good action.
Gotham City from Batman, man. That's what it is.
Very much. I mean, I genuinely like the look of this movie, the neo-noir. Because of the shield, it's basically always nighttime. They do a lot of really cool stuff with the lighting. There's a lot of cool stuff. I'm reminded of, like, Dark City and some other, like, movies.
Blade Runner, that sort of thing.
Yes, yeah, 100%. I think it's pretty good look. But this is just a big action set piece here where he, the first assassin, he really gets lucky. He's running from him mostly, and then a train runs over his head, kills that first assassin. And we learned from the first movie that whenever they are beheaded, this energy surge is released, and that is the Quickening, as we understand it from the first movie. But that gets expanded on in this movie, where when that energy comes out, you can use it to do things, and McLeod uses it to regain his immortality in youth. And it's not too explicit. Like, the energy comes out, all this smoke comes up, and McLeod walks out of it like a badass, and he's young. And we're off to the races. That's about the only explanation that we get. But yes, I agree. It is pretty cool. He's got the trench coat, he's got the look, and he's a badass. So this second fight, he is a lot more offensive, taking on this second assassin. And there's this cool set piece with the assassin. Again, they're like bird people. They fly through the set, and I can just see that they built this giant set with these big set pieces and zip lines, and just good old Hollywood movie making is what I like so much about it. It feels like, it's reminiscent of what makes the first one so enduring. These big set pieces that are shot well, and it's like a fun stunt show to watch. So I had a lot of fun here. I think it's just the genuinely badass fight, which, again, the first movie is full of them. This one doesn't have as many, but I think this one in particular lives up to the action from the first one. I really enjoyed it, and I guess with the reputation, the 0%, I wasn't expecting anything like this. So whenever this happens, and I think it's well executed, I gotta say, favorite scene in the movie.
I think it's a good pick. This is probably that sequence of McCloud coming out of the smoke, all de-aged and looking like the McCloud of old. Although I guess he looked like that for most of his life, and he only looked old for the end of it. But anyway, it's really awesome. And like you said, you get to run with some interesting set pieces here. Like I said, they're definitely living in that Blade Runner, Brazil, Batman '89 aesthetic. This whole sequence could have taken place at Ace Chemical from Batman '89, and it would have seemed completely normal. But yeah, they get to have some creativity. The guys fly around a lot, so there's a lot of a lot of wire work through here. It's all practical. There's no CG at this point, so these guys are just flying around, and maybe it looks a little dated, but still pretty cool looking. Obviously, they get to do some cool stuff with that, some great action stuff, and ultimately, like you said, the result is McCloud restored to his ute, and it is pretty cool.
I guess now's a good time to ask, Andrew, why does immortal McCloud look like a 30-something-year-old Christopher Lambert, but immortal Ramirez looks like a 60-year-old Sean Connery?
I mean, when you think about the nature of what immortality, I have no friggin' idea.
Best not to think about it.
It's
and that's
like,
not even specific to this movie. Like, it's not really explained.
Why does the immortal? Why does Christopher Lambert magically look like Christopher Lambert looks at that time, and Sean Connery magically looks like what Sean Connery looked like at that time? Because that's what they looked like at that time. Which, to be fair to Sean Connery, the man don't look 61 here, not really. But it looks good.
It looks good.
It looks good. But yeah, it's always fun. It's the age old, like, why does, at the end of Return of the Jedi, why does Anakin get young and Obi-Wan stays old? Like, if the Force Ghost is, and I've seen a lot of mental gymnastics to justify that one.
Anakin dies as a young person.
Yes, like Anakin's vision of himself is what he was like before he became Darth Vader, whereas Obi-Wan's vision of himself is how he was when he was old, because he was still himself. But
if
I don't know.
Could look like Ewan McGregor, I think in the afterlife, I would choose to look like Ewan McGregor.
Why wouldn't you?
Andrew, I don't want to not talk about the character of Katana for too long. So I want to jump right back and talk about probably my favorite scene with Katana. I mean, I love the subway chase, but shortly after that, he takes a taxi because he understands how these things work. And this taxi driver is driving him. The taxi driver doesn't shut up, and he seems like he would be annoying, but he ends up being endearing to Katana, which I think is pretty funny. And the taxi driver just looks at this guy and he's like, "Are you in the music business? I got a second sense for these things. I knew it. You're in the music business, right? My sister's in the music business." And just nonstop talking. And then finally Katana's like, "Stop here." He's like, "Where?" He's like, "Here, stop right now. Stop the car." He stops the car. And I don't know why Katana does what he does next, but he throws his sword through the windshield. And Andrew, the taxi driver's reaction to this, which I've got the note here, I'll read what he says, even though I got to bleep it all in post. The sword goes through right by his head. He looks over and goes, "God damn! Whoa! Yeah!" And he goes, "You and my sister should compare tattoos or something." It's like, what? This character reminds me of the character of Demon from
Friday the 13th, Part 5.
Thank you. I was trying to think of the number, 5 or 6. Yes, where it's just this side character that is just hilarious and really pops, and you don't really know why he's there, but you don't care because he's so much fun. I love it. Taxi Drivers has this one scene, but he's hilarious. Katana continues to demolish his cab, break all the windows and mirrors, but then he tells, James is the cabbie. He's like, "Write this all off on the insurance and add a little bit more to the tab for yourself."
He says, "Put it on my tab." He says, "Put it on." He says, "Add that to my tab," and add a little something for yourself too.
Yeah,
which,
what does that mean? Like what?
I mean, obviously, like it's like when you're adding a tip, I guess the idea is, or when you're just building out the bill, you add like lines in, and he's just telling
He's gonna turn
like,
in an invoice to his company for the damage this customer did, but add more than he needs to keep for himself.
And again, why does Katana know what any of this is? Like, why does Katana know what a tab is? Like, what is he? How is Katana familiar with tipping culture? Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't get it.
I also love that his name is Katana because one, the Katana sword. How does that? Whatever. But also we get to hear
doesn't use.
Raiden era Christopher Lambert say Katana multiple times when I've heard them say that a million times in the Mortal Kombat movie. So it was fun to hear that used. But I just love the scene. I love it's funny. It's weird because like I know the tone of this movie, particularly the comedic tone, is one of the sticking points that people don't like about it, and I get that if you're a huge fan of the first one. But at the same time, when I'm watching this movie, I like it most when it's being absurd and funny. It's the most entertaining, despite it being a tone different from the first one. Whatever, I'm having fun when the movie's having fun. So I love this taxi ride. I love the cabbie. I love that again. He's endearing to Katana, and he takes a liking to this guy. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, this is just a blast. And anytime Katana's on screen, basically just hamming it up, I can't help but be a little bit excited about what's happening because Michael Ironside is just going for it. And every single sequence, he is not messing around. He is having an absolute blast playing this character. And it shows. And when there's that kind of enthusiasm in playing a character, it's tough for it not to bleed into the viewing experience. And I think that is doubly true in a sequence like this, where he's just like needlessly destroying this cab for no reason. Like, just like no reason at all to do what he's doing, but he's doing it anyway. And I don't mind.
You know what's interesting? Now that I've seen 2 movies in this franchise, it's probably well known, even to people who haven't seen the movies, that you can't fight on holy ground. That's like a rule these immortals have, a code. If you're in any, whatever religion, just any holy ground, you don't fight.
Yep.
And through 2 movies, nobody breaks that rule. Like, just through, I don't know, like the science of screenwriting, you expect it to be established so the bad guy can break the rule at some point, and it never happens. Through both movies, occasionally the good guy and bad guy meet in a church or whatever, and it's just an excuse for them to have a dialogue scene rather than a fight scene, and they taunt each other. And in both cases, first movie and this one, the villain gets to say like vulgar things in a church, and a lot of people get disgusted or whatever. But I don't know if at some point in the franchise someone breaks that rule, but from what I can tell, it's not like decapitations don't work on holy ground. It's just we have a code that we don't fight on holy ground. Do you find it weird that no one breaks this rule, Andrew?
Hey, you know what? I find it weird, if only because rules that you can't break in almost anything solely exist for them to be broken.
100%. It's like a Chekhov's gun thing. Like, you're telling me this isn't going to happen because you know it's going to happen.
I think it's mostly a narrative device in that it allows for the villains to have confrontations that don't escalate into a fight.
Yeah.
Basically, like, you get a scene in this movie where Katana and McLeod have a conversation at his second wife's grave. I think it's what was his wife's name in the first one? Brenda?
It's very important that you remember the correct dead wife's name, Andrew.
Yes, Brenda Wyatt. She's the woman from the first movie that he ends up with. There is a sequence in one of the movies where you see her die. It's not in the one I watched, but I think it's in the one you watched. Because again, why wouldn't there just be multiple versions of this movie?
Yeah, he returns to the village. She's an old woman. He holds her in his arms, and she dies.
Because she's dying from radiation poisoning, I think, from the Earth.
And that's what motivates him to fund
to save
shield.
The world. Well, save the world, and then look at what you did, McLeod. But anyway, I think it's an interesting narrative device because, like I said, there's so many movies and things where like they want to do this talking head thing between the villains, but you're kind of like, but it doesn't really make any sense why you're not just fighting him because he's done awful things or blah 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 blah. And so by adding this kind of caveat, they allow for the villain and the hero to kind of monologue at each other and have a semi-story reason for why it doesn't immediately devolve into a fight. And I can't speak to whether or not the entire franchise plays by that rule. Maybe one day I'll have the willpower to check it out, but I do think it's an interesting rule that allows, like I said, for some more overdramatic monologuing.
In the first movie, and I'll talk about too much. We're not covering the first movie, but the villain, they meet in a church, and he looks to some nuns and says some vulgar things. He goes, la, 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 and it's maybe my favorite scene in the movie.
Clancy Brown, man.
Possibly my Mark Strong award. This is an unofficial Mark Strong award pick, because we're not covering that first movie, but I might go Clancy Brown. In this one, Michael Ironside says, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. If you don't take it out and use it, it's going to rust. Of course, talking about a sword, Andrew.
Yes, that's all he's talking about.
I thought that was quite funny. Andrew, speaking of vulgar scenes, there's this great scene where Sean Connery's on a plane, which we get this whole... Oh, why is this even in the movie? I don't care, because it's fun. He's on a plane sitting next to this woman, charming the pants off of her, because, as we established, a 61-year-old Sean Connery is still charming as hell. And she has dark hair, and he's saying, the most beautiful women throughout history had dark hair. Helen of Troy and Joan of Arc. And is Joan of Arc even known for her beauty? I don't know. Cleopatra. And he's charming her, and he clearly says... He like whispers in her ear at some point, like we don't know what he says, but she starts giggling. The flight attendant comes by and offers them food, and he says, "Oh no, you want any?" He goes, "Oh no, thanks. We don't think we even see what the food is." But he says, "I never eat anything I cannot identify." And the flight attendant walks off and looks at the woman and says, "That's not entirely true, of course." And she giggles again. It feels like he's saying something sexual. But I don't understand how it is. I never eat anything I cannot identify. Well, that's not entirely true, of course. Is he saying that he cannot identify? Oh, I'm not gonna say it. What is it sexual, Andrew?
Probably.
It's like vaguely sexual, and I can't even like put the pieces together, but it works, I guess. She giggles.
Yep.
I imagine he joined the Mile High Club before he got off that plane. It's not shown. Maybe that's in one of the cuts. Show me the Sean Connery fuckboy cut.
Jesus Christ.
It's so good. It like every one of his scenes is like comedic. Like when he shows up, he's like interrupts a stage play of Shakespeare, and the actor's getting frustrated. And like I guess the audience thinks it's part of the show or whatever. They're laughing, and the actor is getting frustrated with him, and he calls him a shithead. And Sean Connery is like shithead, and he clearly doesn't understand what that word is, because Sean Connery thinks he's saying sithead.
No.
Nothing? I get nothing for that, Andrew?
No. No.
He clearly doesn't know the term, and he he walks off stage and says, "All right, bye, shithead." Like he clearly thinks it's just a greeting, and it's pretty funny.
It's an age-old, there was a the Beverly Hillbillies movie they made with Jim Varney. At one point, they're driving through the mean, busy California streets, and they cut somebody off. And the guy says, "You just cut us off," and he gives him the finger. And so they all assume that's just how you say hello in California. So throughout some of the movie, they see people and they flip them the finger because they think they're saying hello, and the people are like, "Oh, what?" Like it's just so yeah. So in age old, we said something that you have no frame of reference for, so you don't realize it's a mean, derogatory statement. But yeah, this is, again, it's just what Sean Connery's character is doing throughout all these sequences. Just having a blast playing the kind of, oh no, I have no idea what any of this means.
This movie...
How long do you think he sat for that suit tailoring scene, and how drunk do you think he got?
How, like on set?
Yeah, like I imagine that dude just drank for like 2 days while they shot that sequence, and that was him getting paid.
How many James Bond references did he make? Do you think he put on the suit and said, "I'm Bond"? Do you think he plays around as James Bond?
No, I don't think he does that.
No,
I think
he's
he was
above
over
that.
James Bond by that point.
But the crew probably pestered him to do it, and he got annoyed and just drank some more. Is that more likely?
Yeah, and then probably fought somebody.
And won.
Probably.
This movie #PP, it plays kind of like a collection of scenes. What I mean, there's not a lot of narrative flow from one scene to another. As we know, this movie is chopped up and rearranged, and it feels like that at times. But a lot of individual scenes really pop and have cool ideas. That first movie, I think one of the reasons it has a legacy it does is it's sort of a fresh take on the idea of immortality. It's not really shown as a superpower. It's shown as a curse. It's tormenting McCloud, and he, it's like Highlanders. I guess they're not called Highlanders, but these immortals don't have like super strength or anything. They just can't die. They feel pain still, and even if they heal faster and don't die from it, it can be a sad, tormenting life. That's kind of the message of the first one. This one leans a little bit more into the not supernatural, but superhuman ability. And I think it's best encapsulated in a pretty cool scene where McCloud and Ramirez are breaking into like the SHIELD, I don't know, headquarters, I guess, to try to shut it down. And they just like blast through all the defenses in a car, and they all open fire on the two of them, just filling the car full of bullets.
Yep.
They've got dozens of squibs going off on them. Their bodies are shaking in classic getting shot up in Hollywood ways. And the car finally crashes. They're presumed dead. They're taken to the infirmary. Luis is hiding in the trunk. Somehow doesn't catch a single bullet. That trunk is made of the same material.
They don't build them like they used
as
to.
the subway floor. Yes. But they all go to the infirmary, and they're laying on a table, again, presumed dead. And, Luis, she asked the doctor about it. He's like, oh, no, they're definitely gone. Never seen anything like it. They probably caught 100 bullets. And McCloud sits up and goes, excuse me, 108. Then Ramirez sits up and goes, 112, my shelf. And they have some funny banter about what, constitutes getting shot or whatever. But it's showing this immortality thing in a new way, and I like it. I think it's fun. I think the idea of, like, throwing your body into harm's way because you can't die as a way to sneak into this headquarters is a fun use of their ability. And, again, it's a bit different than the first one, but I think it's approaching this idea in a fresh way, which is kind of necessary if you're going to turn this thing into a franchise and continue it. So it doesn't bump for me too much. And overall, I just thought it was a very fun scene.
Yeah, it's just, they're playing around with it. Obviously, they have a mission at this point. They're having like a goal. Like, it's obviously this is a bit of a change up from the first movie, because in the first movie, the only story is the Quickening, basically, the game, as it were. And in this one, we've got this. The whole Zeist, it's so interesting to me that they do this thing with Zeist, because it's not the point of the plot. The plot is the shield with the radiation levels around the Earth, so it seems so odd to me that you complicated the history of the Immortals so much by adding
it feels like
in
they
all
had
of this.
two ideas for a sequel and combined them. Like, one idea
Right,
is explaining the Immortals, one idea is the shield, and they just stuck them together.
Yeah, and I don't know if the original idea was that the Immortals were going to be aliens from another planet, or if they were just going to be exiles from an ancient past. I don't think either one is particularly good, #PP. I think they're both kind of strange, like really unnecessary reaches for those characters, and as far as a way to handle it. But obviously you're looking for a way to, you've got to get, I guess the issue at the end of the day is that if you've got Highlander 2 with an aged McCloud stopping a company from controlling the world with a shield we don't need, like, that's not a Highlander movie. You've got to get the swords, you got to get the Immortals, you got to get the Quickening. So they kind of found a very weird way to bring it all back, and I'm like, I'm sure there was another way to do this. I'm sure there was another way you could have done this, but it is odd, but by adding in kind of a mission, you're able to change that dynamic, and they're able to kind of relish being immortal versus kind of in the first one where it's a burden. Obviously, in this case, being immortal means, hey, we don't die when this happens. There's even another really gnarly scene where he falls down an elevator and he does like the Deadpool, like has to fix how all of his bones are set when he's at the bottom. Yeah. And I'm like, oh man, that's brutal. But because they never really do it that way in the first one. Like you never really get a sequence like that where like something happens and
like all the pain is real in the first one. Like they take wounds, they get hurt like anybody else. They just happen to not die. Like, definitely.
It's a difference between surviving and like not being affected by it. In the first movie, you just survive everything. In this one, you straight up like you're basically Superman at this point, or you're Deadpool, or you're Wolverine, whatever you want to call it. And so they add into that banter. And like I said, this is kind of the scene before this is when Ramirez and McCloud kind of reunite for the first time, and of course they do that by having a sword fight,
as you do, because
that's what you do. And that's when they kind of explain.
Love, but
they should have. He's not official with Virginia Madsen yet. There's plenty of time. You know, there's nothing wrong with it. Not there's anything wrong with that. But but yeah, and this is where they kind of explain the plan. They kind of explain to Ramirez what's going on, and Ramirez is basically telling him, yeah, you got to fix this. And so this leads them to that point, like you said, and then ultimately Sean Connery just kind of exits the film rather unceremoniously.
Yeah, he saves him from a big fan. I thought he was going to decapitate him, but he just kind of gets smashed by it. I don't know.
He uses his magic to move it back up, open the door, and then he returns to the quickening. I guess.
Yeah, sure.
Like you do.
It's funny we talk about, explaining either explanation.
And then something like that happens where you're just like, none of this makes any sense. What just happened? Like, why?
Either explanation to aliens or ancient past doesn't seem too fulfilling. And it's that thing of that franchises will do or movies will do sometimes where it's like explaining the origin of something that no one was asking for.
Answering questions no one was asking.
I'm always reminded of this old Patton Oswalt bit where he's talking about the prequels and how much he doesn't like them. And he's talking about just that, explaining things we weren't asking. Like, you like Darth Vader? He's badass, right? Here he is as a 12-year-old boy. And he's like, that's not cool. Like, I don't need to see this. It's like, you like Angelina Jolie, huh? You think she's hot? Here's John Voight's balls. It's like, it's showing me something a long time ago that doesn't enhance the experience.
That's good.
So,
well, and Chris, unfortunately for us, there's we'll never have a chance to talk about the Star Wars prequels. Definitely not in the next few months. So it's definitely going to be it. So we'll see. But that is like a perfect explanation. But yeah, it's typically the issue I have with prequels by and large is that when you start tinkering into the past, one, it means there's only so many places you can go because
it's got to
everything has to end up in a certain place.
Yeah.
And the best prequels are the ones that find a way typically to tell a story that does fill in some gaps, but largely tells its own story, but that manages to make its own story a little bit more open-ended.
Yeah, perhaps with new characters, like Rogue One, for example.
I'm going to say this. I think one of the most interesting examples I ever saw, and it was just this year, was The First Omen. I was shocked at how good The First Omen was. I was genuinely blown away that 50 plus years later, I think 50 exactly. I don't remember when The Omen was, 74 maybe, but somebody made when they were like, we're making an Omen prequel in 2024, I was like, dude, what? I was like, it's like, there's no way this is like, remember like the Exorcist prequels or things like that. Like, you're just kind of like, my God, what are we doing? Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
but
Texas Chainsaw, the beginning or whatever.
Right. But they center it on a new character who has ties to the original story, has some connective threads to that story thrown at the end of the film, but manages to tell its own story and then does leave it a little bit open-ended if they wanted to do something else with that down the line. But I was just shocked. Like, watching that movie, like, about halfway through, I was like, I was watching it by myself because, I'm an adult and I do what I want. But I was like watching it, like about halfway through, I turned to my non-existent friend and was like, this is good, right? Like, this is like actually good. Like, I was genuinely like blown away because there was another one that came out this year. Oh God, I think it was maybe called Immaculate or something. It had Sydney Sweeney. It was another looked like an art house nun movie or something, and I was like, it was coming out the same time as The First Omen, so I thought we were getting like a Pepsi Coke situation where there was going to be like the art house conflicted nun movie made alongside the Omen prequel with nuns, and one was clearly going to be better. But it ended up kind of being the opposite, where like the art house one was the one where I was kind of like, I could take or leave that. And then this one, I was like, oh wow, this was genuinely good. I was like, so prequels are just, but then like I really thought about it. I was like if somebody asked me to name like 5 prequels I genuinely enjoyed / went back to, like, I don't know if that list exists. Like, I can think of a few, but like, there's not that many because so many of them are just playing in that sandbox, and they're playing it safe in that sandbox. Like, they're not just like they're not telling anything that's interesting. Rogue One found a really good way to do that, obviously, because all we knew, all that has to happen is those plans have to make it to Princess Leia. Everything else, completely open. That story is completely yours to tell. So you're able to go anywhere you want with it. Introduce any characters you want. Anything you want to do, you can do it. Now, I will say this. I think Solo ends up being a little underrated, if only because you do, again, have kind of similar leeway. We only know about that character from a certain point on, and we only know some of his past. So there's a lot of room to play. The problem with a lot of prequels is not so much that there isn't room to do something, it's that they largely don't. It's that they tell a story that like clockwork syncs you up to the original film, sometimes to like seconds before it happens, which to be fair, Rogue One does. But they do it in such a way that like it's not interesting, there's no tension, there's no anything, because you know X, Y, and Z has to happen. And so it ends up being a really tough thing when you go back and try to mess with things. And I think there's a reason the greatest prequels of all times list is probably a flyer, not a booklet or even a pamphlet.
It's funny we went off on this tangent because this is not a prequel.
I don't know how we got here. What were we talking about?
Because it explains the Immortals. It's a question I'm going to ask for, but still solid. As you said, we will talk much more prequel talk soon, maybe for the year's over. But the end of this movie, McLeod decapitates Katana, and he uses the Quickening to destroy the shield, and the ozone layer has repaired itself, and all is good. That's the end. This movie, I will say, this is a low bar. It's not as bad as I expected. 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the legacy. There was individual scenes I enjoyed, which we got to discuss here. But yeah, I understand why it has the legacy it does, why its relationship to the first one is so troubling to so many people. And there's so many versions of it. I was like, this is like ripe for fan edits, which I've kind of had my eye on this community for a while. So I looked at fanedit.org for some cuts, and a very popular one is called Highlander II, The Show Must Go On, which uses it pulls the best from all the different versions. It's a lean cut. It's like 96 minutes, and it adds Queen to the soundtrack. Because the person who made it was like, yeah, I thought Queen was missing after being so prominent in the first one. So I might be checking that out, Andrew. It's a weird, truly the worst movies I finish and say, I never want to watch that again. There's a world where I watch another cut of this movie again. So by that metric, it's not the worst.
I can agree with that. I do find it funny. Well, because in the first movie, they do describe the Quickening as like a kind of magic. Which ended up being the title of the Queen album that came out and featured most of the songs from Highlander. And if I think about 80s science fiction films that Queen contributed to the soundtrack for, if I had a nickel for every one of those, I'd have 2 nickels.
Andrew, what's the other movie?
Flash Gordon.
You say that like it's common knowledge? Have
you never heard the song Flash by Queen?
I don't know. Maybe.
It's got dialogue from the film in it, so I'm guessing no.
Okay,
but anyway, yeah, I'm guessing you have.
I'm like best of Queen greatest hits.
I thought that was
Queen
pretty well known, but I we'll see if the Discord agrees with that or not. But anyway, in this movie they do that several times where they do like it's like, so it's magic, kind of. They have like they do like cheeky wordplay on it, so they don't just say it's a kind of magic again. But they do say in this film, especially in like the first 20 minutes, like they say something like that way too many times for my liking. Where that like she explains how his whole thing works, where she's like, "So you were immortal, and then you weren't immortal, and you're from the planet Zeist, but you became immortal again when people from Zeist came here." And she explains like the whole thing.
Yeah.
And he just goes, "Yeah, something like that." And then he's talking to like Alan later, and he's like, he's asking about how he's younger, and it's like he asks him what he did, and he's like, "Yeah, something like that." I was like, we're just explaining away every single issue in this film with "yeah, something like that."
That bit was good. Like the movie acknowledging the convoluted nature of its lore. I thought that was pretty good, Andrew.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Andrew, we're now 2 films in to 0% on Rotten Tomatoes month. And, you know, I think I stand by. I think I said this previously. Not the most difficult month we've had so far, as you might expect with the theme. But, you know, not that we're only covering these hidden gems or anything, but I'm having a good time digging into these. I think we're really getting at the core of our premise with this.
Yeah, definitely. It is interesting. So far, the movies we haven't watched, #PP, are not the most difficult movies I think we've done on this podcast so far. I think these two, in the grand scheme of thing, are not. Highlander 2 is a complicated thing. And I guess I'll kind of close my thoughts with just the idea that, like, it's a movie that goes so out of its way to undo the actions of the movie that came before it. It gets bogged down in its own retconning of the film that came before it. And as such, I think that colors the whole opinion of it. Like you said, there's scenes in this movie that are perfectly good, if not great. There's performances that are fun. There is stuff to enjoy, I think, but it is obviously kind of the cloud over the whole thing, or the McCloud over the whole thing, if you will, is simply that this movie's existence basically undoes all of Highlander. And I think in that regard, that colors the entire opinion of this movie. And I think a lot of people that just like the exposition and the explanation for like why it undoes Highlander is just not there for most people. So in that regard, it colors the whole opinion. But watching it, I don't think is difficult. There are movies we've done for this podcast that were more difficult to watch than either of these, is the way I'll say it so far. So,
well, we have 2 more films to go, so we'll see if this attitude and opinion holds up through the end of the month. But before we get to those 2 films, it is, of course, time for our question of the week. And if you want to leave a question for a future episode of this podcast, you can do exactly that by hopping into our Discord server. If you haven't done so already, there's a link, there's an invite in our show notes. So just go click on it. Join us. Join the discussion. Talk about this podcast or any other fun topic you would like with the community. It's always a good time in there. We got a channel to drop those questions, though. So this week, our question comes from Groffles, who says, do you have a gateway video game? Like, is there a video game you have played which opened up other non-video game interests? A good example could be Baldur's Gate 3 for some people, as it is the new hot game released. This question's kind of old, and it is a very good example of playing D&D. So who knows, maybe some people will start playing D&D as a result. Groffles, great question. Gateway video game. Playing a video game and it leads you to another real life interest, a non-video game interest. Andrew, is anything spring to mind for you? Because I have one from my childhood that I think is going to be very common.
No, nothing. No, I'm kidding. It's a tough question, and like I don't know that I've ever had one. Like, I guess there's one I can talk about. It's a little bit more recent, but you could the childhood story. Please go first.
I likely never would have bought a skateboard if it weren't for Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Like, that completely got me into skateboarding. And I'm not even, like, I was never great on a skateboard. I was, I was happy to finally be able to ollie, but I'm not grinding rails or doing anything. I never had like a nice skateboard. It was like Walmart or whatever. But that drive to even try to learn 100% came from Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Watching X Games occasionally or whatever, learning who these skaters were. I mean, that was huge because I learned the roster from Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. I think an entire generation of skaters, multiple generations of skaters, and I'm talking about like legitimate skaters, not like me, but people who are like now professionals or, God, we're old, probably retiring from skating at this point, did so because of those games. I think they were just huge for the skating industry. That's the wrong way to say it. Sport of skateboarding. But even my small interest, even my little bit of skating, my skating phase is 100% because of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater.
Yeah, I have the same experience, but it was my love of Goldfinger. So it's basically the same
honestly,
thing.
Yeah. There's a great documentary about the video games and their influence called, what's it called? Is it called Pretending I'm a Superman? It's a line from Superman. It's because that song is like the anthem for the franchise. But yeah, that's another good point. Definitely got into a lot of music through those soundtracks as well.
Yeah, I can't pretend. Yeah, I love Tony Hawk Pro Skater. I had it on my N64. Bob Burnquist. The only reason I know who he is at all is because of Tony Hawk Pro Skater. That's definitely high up there. I was gonna go with something a little bit more recent because it kind of turned me on to like a style of game that I hadn't really explored before, and then ultimately kind of led me to kind of examine more stuff kind of in the genre. So, I was never really a big horror guy for a long time. Like, I'd watch horror movies, like the classics and stuff like that, but I was never somebody that like really dived into horror stuff in general, books, movies, anything. But I saw somebody playing Until Dawn on PS4, I think it was when it first came out. And they talked about the notion of what it was, the idea of like a cinematic, like a choose your own adventure type narrative game presented in like a cinematic way, featuring real actors and stuff like Rami Malek and Hayden Panettiere and all that. And I was really struck by it. And at the time, I didn't have a PS4. So I got a PS4 specifically so I could play Until Dawn. And that really kind of turned me onto the notion of like the cinematic narrative type game. So that led me to stuff like Heavy Rain. Eventually stuff came out like Detroit or The Quarry, which was the latest one that came out from the people that made Until Dawn, as well as all those co-op games that we still have to play. I
have Man of Medan downloaded, Andrew, whenever you're ready.
All right, I know it's my fault. But
every time we hang out, we just record a podcast instead.
It's ridiculous. We just record us playing that game one day, and it's just going to be me screaming like a child for most of it. Something's going to happen, and Chris is going to be like, Andrew, are you all right? And I'm going to be like, no, I'm not all right. So I started looking into people that were talking about Until Dawn, and I saw stuff that was like, hey, if you kind of liked that story, here's some other stuff you can check out. And it sent me down this path of like creature feature books, and like it turned me onto a lot of different books and other just horror movies, stuff like the horror movie The Ritual, which is a wild movie if you've never seen it. But all that was because I checked out Until Dawn. Which, and then I ended up, like I said, I played Heavy Rain and Detroit, and I like those games. I think they're really, really cool. And I like that style because I don't particularly think I'm good at like I play Fortnite all the time, but I think I'm really bad at it. And because I play that to hang out with people mostly. Like I have a friend in North Carolina that I play Fortnite with, and then I play Fortnite with my brother. Occasionally, sometimes the three of us play together, and then we're markedly better because my brother is really good at Fortnite. Like I'll get killed immediately, and then he goes and kills all three members of the other team by himself. But by looking at Until Dawn and kind of diving into that, and then seeing this kind of horror-related kind of fandom that was kind of attached to it, that was like, hey, if you like that, check out this. If you like this, check out that. Kind of turned me onto a lot more horror stuff in general. So I have a lot more horror books than I used to. I've bought a lot of kind of strange horror movies that I probably never would have really looked at otherwise because of that. And that is because I played Until Dawn, which was only, I was well in my 20s. So I'm like, it's not like it's that old, but
PS4, you're right, were released. Still to this day, one of the best looking games I've ever played. I love
100%.
just the menus where just be a character's face on screen and like you can move the stick to make their eyes move or whatever. I would just just have the menu up and just make them look around. I'm like, guys, look at this. Look how good. Like,
unbelievable.
It looks amazing. It looks so good. Yeah, I love that game. I have not played all. I've played Heavy Rain, which also I played that before Until Dawn. Friend of the show, my wife has played Detroit Become Human. Our daughter has started playing it. I've seen scenes, haven't played it myself. As you said, we got to get into the co-op ones, and The Quarry, I think I also have downloaded, but haven't played, so I need to catch up. But I do love that genre in those games. Andrew, I'm going to recommend another one to you that I think I've recommended before, but I'm doing it again. Return of the Obra Dinn. It is fantastic. It's an indie game. It should be very cheap. It's developed literally by one person. It has this very cool, unique art style. But in that game, you are on this ship where all the crew members have died, and your job is to journal what happened to all of them, how they died. Yeah, that's it. Identify the crew and how they died. And
that sounds like I made that just for me.
So, like, a scene will play out. There's no... I think this is the first scene you see, so very mild spoilers, but you might see a short 10, 15, 30-second scene where these people argue and one of them shoots the other. And then the scene freezes, and you can walk around the scene like in 3D. So you can walk around and look for clues, check name tags. And I think this very first scene, the person shooting has a captain's hat on. So you're like, okay, that must be the captain. So that's his name. Who is he shooting? Who killed who and how? Kind of like Clue. Like solving Clue, right? But there's like 60 crew members you got to go through. And as you solve them, like I think every 3 you solve, you unlock a new scene. It's fantastic. It is so good, but it combines a lot of stuff that you like cinematic storytelling, detective work, whodunit. It's right up your alley. You're gonna love it. Highly recommend checking that thing out.
Well, it's not on sale right now, but I've added it to my wish list.
What is it? $10, $15?
$20.
$20. Okay, yeah, wait for a sale, but it's fantastic. It's worth 20, but yeah, you never feel full price for an old game. We all know that.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah, highly recommend. Yeah, that's a great example. Right. So, like, this question specifically from Groffles is about video games leading to outside interests, like you said, with horror. Video games leading to other video games is huge, though. Like, I didn't think I liked rogue games, roguelike or roguelite or whatever you want to call them. Games where every time you die, you start over. I was like, yeah, that sounds horrible. And then what was the first one I got into? I don't know, but like Hades, one of my favorite games of all time. I'm playing the heck out of Vampire Survivors on my phone, and it just came to PlayStation, so I'm going to start all over there. Even like Slay the Spire, which is like a rogue, but also a card game, which I thought I didn't like card games, but because it's a rogue, I tried it out. That's also one of my favorite games of all times. It's become like my favorite genre, and I thought I didn't like it. I don't know which game I credit, probably Hades, for really getting me into it, but can't wait for Hades 2. And yeah, video games leading to other interests. This is a great question, and I want to hear from more people about it. So by all means, if you've gotten into any real life interest or hobbies because of a video game, let us know. Again, hop into that Discord, join the community, join the conversation, and of course, come back next week as 0% Month continues with Problem Child. Andrew, I have seen this movie. I watched it numerous times as a child, have not revisited it, but I like it. It holds like a positive influence in my brain. I only remember Gilbert Gottfried, and I think when I rewatch it, I'm going to be shocked by how little he's in the movie. But in my mind, this is a good time, but it has a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't know what we're getting into with this.
I have no real memories of this film. I know it exists. I know John Ritter's in it. I don't really remember anything else. So otherwise, I will be going into this movie largely blind. And we will see how that goes.
We're discussing that next week. And until then, just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Check him out on Instagram at Not That Mark Anthony, and thanks to Mitch for the music. You can follow him on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some best of the rest merch. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That's the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.